The Gaza ceasefire deal signed, sealed, but not yet delivered. In 2 days' time, the bombing is meant to stop and the first hostages released. Good evening. The final hurdles to the ceasefire deal have fallen. The Israeli Security Cabinet has signed off on it. Hamas had already done so. The stage is now set for the first tangible proof of good news after 15 months of carnage. Some hostages will be released on Sunday. At the same time, Israel's and Hamas's guns will fall silent. That is the plan. But even optimists fear that the ceasefire will be brittle and that fighting could resume as long as Israel believes that Hamas still has a presence on the ground in Gaza. And then, of course, there's the much bigger, unanswered question at the root of this war. What kind of state will Palestinians live in? What arrangement guarantees their independence and Israel's security? Also tonight, TikTok will soon be no more in the US for its 170 million users, shut down by the Supreme Court, but will soon to be President Trump enforce the ruling. And the film Fire Inside shows how Clarissa Shields boxed her way out of extreme poverty to win not one but 2 Olympic gold medals. The hardest battle, she tells us, the fight for equal pay.
At a very young age, I just basically let them know, like, hey, I won't even go back to the Olympics, unless you guys, be fair.
After 48 hours of tense final negotiations since the ceasefire deal was announced, Israel's Security Cabinet has now voted to approve it. The Israeli government is expected to pass the final vote this evening, setting in motion the first phase of the deal, which will bring about a pause in the fighting in Gaza and start the release of Israeli hostages. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Sikander Kamani joins us now live from Tel Aviv. Sikander.
Well, Matt, we're really in the final stages ahead of this ceasefire coming into effect now, aren't we? We are still awaiting, as you say, a decision by the full Israeli cabinet, and there'll also be a period in which legal challenges can be filed against the release of particular Palestinian detainees. But currently, neither of those issues expected to delay the ceasefire from coming into force around midday on Sunday. That's despite the opposition to it from 2 key far-right Israeli political parties. Both sides, as a result, right now making preparations ahead of the ceasefire. Israeli officials to receive back hostages, 3 of whom will be released on the first day. Palestinian officials have announced plans to begin clearing key roads of rubble to allow displaced residents back to what's left of northern Gaza. Now, of course, there's still major concern about the possibility of this ceasefire breaking down. There's still a major humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Aid agencies hoping that they'll be able to ramp up their operations to respond to that. A warning, our report contains some distressing details.
Born into a war they might not live to see end. Even as Israel approves a ceasefire deal, in Gaza, these tiny, frail bodies are fighting to survive. This is the neonatal unit of the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis. They're seeing more premature babies than ever before, and more of them are dying. It's down to the conditions pregnant women are facing, Dr. Assad says, with many living in tents and suffering from malnutrition. There are many ways to die in Gaza, especially for those so small and vulnerable. Cold weather has killed 8 newborns in recent weeks. Najaya's son is being treated for hypothermia.
I was living in a tent when my son fell ill. His temperature was very low. Without God and the doctors, my son wouldn't have survived. He couldn't move or cry. I had been begging to get him a blanket.
Aisha? Aisha? A ceasefire and surge in humanitarian aid will come too late for baby Aisha. Her family, displaced multiple times by Israeli assaults, now call a tent home. Her father, Adnan, points out where water leaks in from. The family sleep huddled together to keep warm, he says. Israel has been accused of blocking the entry of vital supplies to Gaza. It denies that, but people here are starving and living in the most dire of conditions. When temperatures dropped one night, Aisha froze to death.
عاشت معي 22 يوم.
She lived with me for 22 days, the sweetest days.
كنت بتمناها عن جد.
I had always wished for her. I already have 4 boys. When I found out she was a girl, I was overjoyed. Despite the war and everything going on, I thanked God. I had the girl I had always hoped for.
For Aisha's brothers, a ceasefire means a chance of a future. But the devastation here is so complete, it's hard to imagine what it will look like. In Israel, the families of hostages due to be released under the ceasefire are torn between hope and dread. Daniel's grandfather is on the list to be freed in the first phase.
It's a tough question, but I mean, do you even know for sure whether he's alive or not?
No, that's why I can't prepare really for my grandfather coming back, because what I prepare for a festival or for a funeral. These things you cannot prepare to both together. So I'll see what the days will bring, but the first thing and most important, the first hostage going out of Gaza with a Red Cross chip.
Israel's Security Cabinet today approved the ceasefire agreement, though it's not clear if it will be extended beyond the first 6-week phase. That would mean a return to war and around 60 hostages remaining in Gaza. One would be Anat's son, Matan, an Israeli soldier.
We've seen some politicians on the right saying they want to return to the war after the first phase. What do you think about that?
I think that they forgot what is to be a Jew. Jewish people want to save life. We won't let them to convince Prime Minister Netanyahu to continue to see soldiers dying. We want to see people live.
Every minute of this conflict has brought so much pain and suffering. Now, less than 48 hours remain before this ceasefire is expected to begin.
So, if next week is indeed the next chapter in the sorry story of the Gaza Strip, what will that look like? After 15 months of war, what is actually left? This is, or was, Gaza. Once the ceasefire begins, those who survived will be trying to get home. There are nearly 2 million people displaced inside Gaza, but what will they be returning to? Israel's intense bombing of the Gaza Strip has left more than 40 million tons of debris. These satellite images show the scale of the devastation after 15 months of conflict. Some of the worst affected areas are in the north of the Strip. 74% of all buildings in Gaza City have been damaged or destroyed, and much of the north still remains under siege. Around 55% of buildings in Khan Yunis have been demolished. Hundreds of thousands were forced to flee here to seek refuge, and yet it still continues to be targeted even after the ceasefire announcement. And in Rafah, once a home to 1.4 million people, almost 50% of all buildings have been damaged. Rafah has been described as a ghost town after the IDF's aerial and ground assault, which they say was targeting Hamas tunnels near the Egyptian border. So what about the human cost? According to Palestinian health authorities, more than 46,000 people have been killed inside Gaza by Israel's offensive since October the 7th. Many of them will be fighters, but most of them are civilians, including at least 13,000 children. Throughout the war, hospitals have been bombed, besieged and attacked. There were 654 attacks on health facilities, according to the World Health Organization, and over 1,050 healthcare workers have been killed, many in their place of work, as they try to care for others. Almost every school building in Gaza has also been destroyed. UNICEF said that there was 564 school buildings in Gaza before the war. 534 have been damaged since then. More than 600,000 children have been deprived of formal schooling. An entire generation set back for decades. Well, earlier I spoke to Dr. Louisa Baxter, a doctor working for Save the Children in Gaza. She's currently stationed in Deir al-Balah in the center of the Strip. I asked her what internally displaced Palestinians in Gaza would be returning to when they try to go home.
They'll be returning to absolute devastation. We know that about 80% of the population in Gaza have to be relocated in this period. And I must be honest, I have been appalled by the level of destruction. There are millions of tons of rubble. Some areas have been bombed so badly, there are no trees left. You see scattered tents with children, often very emaciated now after 15 months of this sort of siege. We're thinking around 17,000 children have lost their families, are unaccompanied. They're coming back to a completely decimated healthcare system where I think less than half of all hospitals are even partially functioning. No electricity, no fuel. We're not able to run generators. We're not able to run intensive care facilities for children. Some children will never go back to school. All the schools have been destroyed. So if the ceasefire does hold, and this is what we are calling for, deaths may stop from bombardment, but children will continue to die from malnutrition, from lack of water, lack of vaccines. There is very little to go back to at the moment.
And who's going to look after these children if they're, 17,000 orphans? Who's going to look after these kids? Where will they look after them? Will they find shelter anywhere?
It's likely that these 17,000 is a gross underestimate. There are children who've been taken in by extended families. We've seen in our clinic young girls and boys coming in age 14 and 15 carrying their 2 or 3-year-old brothers, and they are now the head of the child-headed households. The children who are being looked at by members of the community. But what's happened is the entire protection system is broken down, and this is where agencies like Save the Children try and step in to provide stability and security and child-friendly and child-welcoming spaces for children like this. I think one of the things that struck me most visibly as a doctor in this context is that every child that comes into our clinics, whether they're malnourished, whether they're dehydrated or injured, they have a look of abject, of dullness, of apathy.
Detachment.
Of the last 15 months, detachment of the last 15 months of the whole, some of them for the whole of their lives, taken away. And so the psychological trauma done to these children and their families will be huge.
And presumably there are still many, many children buried under the rubble.
Figures that we have at the moment are distorted, of course, and amplified by so much of the chaos and the noise and the war. But we're quite clear there's children who will never be reunited with their parents and children who will never be found.
Now, ever since the ceasefire was first announced on Wednesday, the Israelis have continued bombarding. Hamas have continued fighting Israeli soldiers. We know that dozens of children have been killed just in the last few days. What about the next few days before the actual ceasefire starts? Are you worried about them?
The ceasefire feels very brittle. We have hope, but the hope is so fragile. Just an hour ago, the home of 2 of our staff members were hit. Fortunately, no one was injured, but we can hear the bombardments around us. We know that 80 people have been killed since the start of the ceasefire. And this is why we have to plead for a definitive ceasefire that is respected by all parties.
Louisa Baxter, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Now, I also spoke to Brigadier General Amir Avivi, who previously served in the Israeli Defense Forces and founded the Israel Defense and Security Forum. I began by asking him what has changed for Israel to get the deal through now.
Basically, Hamas rejected all the way the deal. It never got to the point where it had to go to the Israeli cabinet because Hamas was rejecting it. I think that the big change is mainly 2 things. One, Israel one in Lebanon. Lebanon stopped helping Hamas. Syria fell. Iran is weak. Hamas is isolated. And President Trump, the moment President Trump was elected and said that if they don't release the hostages, there will be hell, they assessed the situation and understood that if they don't sign a deal now, they will be in a much worse position afterwards, and they decided that they'll sign it now.
Of course, Hamas and the Palestinians would say that they've already experienced hell in the last 15 months. Don't you think that that hell that Mr. Trump was talking about was also meant for Mr. Netanyahu?
No, I don't think so, because Israel agreed basically to a deal already in May. I think the message was to Qatar, to Egypt, to Hamas. And I think that after we release the first 33 hostages, then we'll see the real deal. Here, we have to put a completely different pressure on Hamas to release the remaining hostages. This will require very strong military pressure and also a completely different approach, talking about the humanitarian aid and how to disconnect Hamas from the society. Hamas is controlling the aid. It's bringing 15, 16-year-old children to fight.
So if that's the case, where do you see the future then of relations between Israel and the Gaza Strip? Because if Hamas is still in control, as you say, if they're beefing up, despite the fact that they've had so many losses in the last 15 months, then what's the future going to look like?
The day after in Gaza, it's only the day after Hamas. So it's either Hamas gives up and leaves the Gaza Strip, and then Israel will start building new local leadership or working with the local leadership of the Palestinians in the different cities, or we'll have to fight and use every tool we have to bring down Hamas. There is no scenario where this war ends and Hamas is in power.
So where do you draw the dividing line? How do you measure that? Because there's always going to be, hundreds, if not thousands, of Hamas sympathizers or supporters, especially after what everyone's been through in the Gaza Strip. Will you use that as an excuse to just carry on with this war till the end of time?
And the core issue is education. If there won't be a process of de-radicalization of the society, then unfortunately this will never end. This is like a swamp creating endless amount of mosquitoes. By dealing with the mosquitoes, we need to deal with the swamp. We need to dry it.
And do you think that helping to de-radicalize Palestinians in Gaza might involve not bombing them, or maybe showing a kinder side, a kinder face of Israel to the people of Gaza?
I think that the understanding needs to be that what we're experiencing and the fight, this existential fight we are having, is no different from what Britain experienced with the Nazis. At the end of the day, you need to win the war decisively to do a process of de-radicalization, just as Britain and the US did in Germany and in Japan after World War II. It's no different.
Right, but after World War II, there was no collective punishment of the German people. There was denazification, and then we had the Marshall Plan, which built up the German economy, and indeed the same happened in Japan, and established democratic institutions. But so there was a switch from aggression to help, to a benign face almost immediately.
Yeah, we see it exactly the same. But remember that to do the Marshall Plan, the US and Britain and the allies controlled Germany for a few years. You can't just win against Hamas, get out and expect something to happen.
And finally, I mean, at the end of World War II and at the end of that phase of reconstruction, there was a stable, sovereign, independent West Germany that emerged. Are you going to say now that there should be an independent, sovereign Palestinian state that comes out of all this a few years after the war's over?
I think that definitely the vast majority of Israelis and also politicians, they want self-governance for the Palestinians. So I think that Israel, in order to be safe, would agree to some kind of statehood, but to a state that is not armed. We cannot have a meter from...
But it's not really a proper state, is it? If it doesn't have its own army, if it's not in control of its own borders, if that's left to Israel, it's not like Germany after World War II, is it? It's going to be something completely different.
No, it has to be adjusted to the reality of the Middle East.
But that's not attractive to the Palestinian people, ever. You're not holding out much of a prospect of dignity and self-determination to them, if that's the plan.
I don't agree. I don't think that what will bring them dignity is being weaponized. I think that what will bring them dignity is jobs, it's economy, it's prosperity. And this is something that definitely Israel can really help them achieve.
Amir Avivi, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Now, here at home, 2 people who took their own lives in a Scottish young offenders institution were handed a death sentence. That's according to a lawyer for their families, as a fatal accident inquiry blamed systemic failures for their deaths. Katie Allen, who was 21, and 16-year-old William Lindsay died in Polmont Youth Offenders Institution back in 2018. Katie's mother, Linda Allen, said that her daughter had been brutalised so far that she had lost all hope. Our Scotland correspondent, Catherine Sampson, has this report.
Born into very different backgrounds, they died just months apart. Katie Allen and William Lindsay took their own lives inside Scotland's largest young offenders unit in Polmont near Falkirk in 2018. Katie was a 21-year-old student from a supportive family, serving a short sentence for a drink driving offence where she injured another young person. She spoke about being bullied by other prisoners and had a history of self-harm. William spent most of his life in care. He was arrested after walking into a police station with a knife. Prison staff were told the 16-year-old had a history of attempted suicide. He was put into Polmont because there was no space for him in a secure children's unit. He died 3 days later. An inquiry has found that both of these deaths could have been prevented if it wasn't for a catalogue of failures by both prison and NHS staff. In William's case, almost all of those who interacted with him in the system were found to be at fault to some extent. In a damning report that runs to over 400 pages, the Sheriff made 25 recommendations, including steps to make prison cells safer. For both families, it's been an exhausting fight to reach this stage.
He was my baby brother. He was a terrified little boy. He was left alone in a cell for up to 10 hours. He was a kid. There's no answers for it. I don't think it's ever going to end when there's still a lot of unanswered questions as well. And in regard to the Scottish Prison Service, I think they just want to wash their hands with it.
Katie was brutalised in Polmont, so much so that she lost all hope and saw only one solution: her death. She lost her hair and was taunted. Her mental health suffered, and a nurse couldn't even be bothered recording accurate records in her antiquated system.
NHS Forth Valley and the Scottish Prison Service issued statements apologising for the failures identified. The Scottish Prison Service said, "We are committed to doing everything we can to support people and keep them safe during the most challenging and vulnerable periods of their lives." They added they would carefully consider the recommendations before responding further. They refused any media interviews. The families want the Prime Minister to change the law that protects prison services from being prosecuted. Fatal accident inquiries don't directly apportion blame, but they do.
As for the Scottish Prison Service, the Forth Valley Health Board, as well as the Scottish Government, First Ministers, former First Ministers and successive Justice Ministers, you should all hang your heads in shame. You are complicit in the deaths that continue to take place. You did more than fail the most vulnerable people in our society. You ignored their cries for help. We do not have a death sentence in this country, but for Katie and William, that is what you served on them.
Scotland's Justice Secretary said it was crucial systemic changes were made to prevent more deaths in custody. She'll make a statement to the Scottish Parliament next week. After 7 years, and a process they say has compounded their anger and their grief, condolences alone won't cut it.
Now, our hard power may have been dwindling over the course of the last century, but what about our soft power? The Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, says she'll turbocharge the UK's creative industries, describing culture as an essential part of who we are as a country. Speaking at Gateshead, she announced a £60 million package of support, most of which will go towards grassroots creative ventures and startups. She's been speaking to our senior political correspondent, Paul McNamara.
For too long, things like film and fashion, TV production, music and video games have been seen as nice to have, stardust, rather than serious economic policy. Well, with our government that is going to change. We've put creative industries at the heart of our industrial strategy because these are industries that are worth 124 billion to the UK economy, and we know with the right amount of support in the right places, there is no limit to what they could do.
Your department didn't do particularly well relative to lots of other departments in the budget. Keir Starmer said he's going to be ruthless. Rachel Reeves said she's going to be the Iron Chancellor. Aren't you expecting cuts coming your way?
Look, you know, we're going through my budget right at the moment, like every other part of government, line by line, to make sure that every pound we spend is spent well. And that's why this announcement about £60 million of government money is significant.
You're talking about that 60 million. So at a time when you're cutting winter fuel payments for old people, you've still got the two-child benefit cap in. It's a hard sell to turn around to the nation and say, yeah, we can't look after the poorest, but you know what? Some fellas who might invent the new Sonic the Hedgehog, we'll give them a few million.
Except it's not some fellas, it's your kids who might have the opportunity to get these incredible jobs that we're creating all over the country. One of the reasons that we're backing the creative industries to the hill is not just because they're growing at 1.5 times the rest of the economy and we've got investors banging on our doors saying, if you partner with us, we can do more. It's because they almost uniquely offer the chance to have good jobs and growth in every part of the country.
This week, the Prime Minister is saying it's regulators. Want them to stop regulating so much, and that's going to drive growth. But you're the one department that's introducing a new regulator for football at a time when the industry creates billions of pounds, it attracts foreign investors, employs thousands of people, and the Premier League clubs are saying, actually, you're the handbrake to growth with your regulation.
Well, look, there are mixed views amongst the Premier League about it, but I accept that there are some clubs who don't want to see the independent football regulator created. We make no apology, though, for saying that we've had too many clubs that have either collapsed or been on the brink of collapse because football hasn't managed to get its own house in order. Now, the regulator is a really good example of the sort of light touch regulation that Keir Starmer wants to see.
OK, many governments of all parties have faced concerns about the funding model of the BBC. There have been reports recently that you might be considering funding the BBC at direct taxation, money from the Treasury, which brings all sorts of questions in about how impartial the BBC can remain. Yeah. Is that on the table?
It isn't, actually, and I didn't want to get into ruling out options at this stage, but general taxation is not a funding model that we're considering, not least because it leaves the BBC open to political interference. But we are thinking very radically and creatively about the future of the licence fee.
Are you thinking of scrapping the licence fee?
Well, look, at the moment, every year, the BBC has to come back to government and ask for an uplift in their funding to be funded through general taxation. So we're looking at all the options for how we might bring in a much more sustainable funding model for the BBC.
OK, so scrapping the licence fee is on the table.
It is.
Is it?
It is, yeah. We're looking at all the different models. There are lots of examples from around the world of how people fund their national broadcasters in different countries. We're looking at all of those. I've kick-started the initial discussions with the BBC already, and we'll be going out to the public to seek their views. The licence fee was designed in a very different era. Things have fundamentally changed, and we've got to make sure that the system that we have doesn't just protect the BBC or patch it up for the next few years, which we've seen happen over and over again, but actually puts it on a sustainable footing so it can continue to thrive until well into the latter half of this century.
There were also reports of a possible merger between Channel 4 and BBC. Is that on the table?
It's not something that we're looking at as a government.
And what about the privatisation of Channel 4?
That is off the table. It's not something that this government will pursue.
OK. Do you want to curb the power of the likes of Elon Musk? Arguably, what we saw Yvette Cooper announce yesterday, the new investigations into grooming grounds, in a large part is down to him.
Look, I utterly reject that. Only a couple of weeks ago, we brought the Children and Wellbeing Bill before the House, which contained the biggest overhaul of child protection legislation in a generation.
Your own minister, Chris Bryant, a minister in your department, said that he thinks that Elon Musk expedited the debate.
I can tell you that this has been a key priority for us.
So is Chris Bryant wrong?
No, he's wrong, yes. We're a government that doesn't govern by social media. We govern in the real world, and victims are absolutely at the centre of our approach.
Lastly, when many people think of Tony Blair, they think of modernisation. When they think of Gordon Brown, they think of fairness. What do you think comes to mind when people think of Keir Starmer and Starmerism?
I think the defining mission of this Prime Minister and this government is about really gripping the challenges that Britain faces. We've been in a state of managed decline for far too long. So
the economy is flatlining at the moment.
Well, the economy actually is on track to be the fastest growing economy in Europe, according to the OECD. The Prime Minister has tasked all of us with thinking long term about what is in Britain's interests, not to just go and court cheap headlines, but to go out and really grip and fix the problems that Britain faces.
Lisa and Andy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Donald Trump will, of course, be sworn in as US President on Monday. I'll be there inside the Capitol Rotunda, not outdoors as usual, because of dangerously cold temperatures. Mr. Trump said that there was an Arctic blast sweeping the country, and he didn't want to see people hurt or injured in any way. Forecasters say the temperature on Monday could plunge as low as -6 degrees, with wind chill making it feel even colder. And once he's thawed out, President Trump will sign a series of executive orders designed to be issued within hours of him actually taking office. They may include major sweeps by immigration officers and tighter security along America's southern border, ahead of Mr. Trump's pledge to introduce mass deportations, possibly for millions of people living there. In California, in the Californian city of Bakersfield, home to a substantial Latino population, federal agents have already begun rounding up undocumented migrants, as Guillermo Galdes has been finding out.
Donald Trump's second term is just days away. On his way to the White House, a campaign promise repeated at every rally.
On day one, I will launch the largest deportation program in American history to get the criminals out.
But many of America's 11 million undocumented migrants have built lives here, doing the jobs most US citizens avoid. What do they think about his return to power? I've come to the huge farmlands around Bakersfield, California, to find out.
Here they harvest nuts, citrus, lettuce, everything. Practically they feed America from here. And the majority of the workers in the fields don't have any documents.
Raúl is one of them. He and his wife came here from Mexico 10 years ago. They have 3 kids, all born here, all with US citizenship.
Así es como realizamos el trabajo día a día y pues con este trabajo pues nos alcanza para pagar nuestra renta, para alimentar a nuestros hijos y mandar a nuestra gente en México.
It's hot, back-breaking work, which pays little. If Trump makes good on his promise, Raúl simply doesn't believe there's enough US citizens willing to do the job.
Mira, como puedes apreciar el campo, no miro ningún güero trabajando. No sé cuál es el sentido de que nos va a sacar a todos. Nosotros los latinos somos los que hacemos el trabajo, como puedes apreciar.
Nearly half of America's 2 million farm workers lack legal status. Industry groups have warned of food shortages and higher prices if mass deportations go ahead.
Andan buscando el de ese carrito Camry que está ahí.
But with immigration officials already targeting the area, the most pressing concern here is avoiding the authorities.
Un poco con temor porque pues no sabemos qué es lo que realmente vaya a pasar, pero pues esperemos que no, porque pues todos venimos en busca de una oportunidad y pues sacar adelante a nuestra familia.
Back in town, those fears are spreading.
Estuvimos platicando con algunas personas aquí en Arvin y los vemos muy asustados por, pues ahora que viene la nueva administración de Trump.
Local radio host Javi has American citizenship, but many of his listeners are undocumented.
Sé que hay muchas dudas, sé que hay muchas preguntas por parte de ustedes. Entonces, hoy, ¿qué les parece si abrimos el micrófono para que nos platiquen un poquito de eso?
This radio station allows listeners to share their concerns, as well as tip-offs to avoid immigration raids. But not all of the Hispanic community is against what Trump stands for.
¡Hola, Filiberto!
¿Qué pasó, Filiberto? ¿Cómo estás?
Aquí riéndome de ustedes.
¿Por qué riéndote de nosotros?
No, porque el que está preocupado, dicen que el migrante no, el que está preocupado es el ilegal. el mantenido. El migrante, nosotros las personas decentes, los ciudadanos que nos hicimos y todo, no tenemos miedo, al contrario, estamos orgullosos que va a llegar el justiciero mayor.
El justiciero, oye, pero a ver, el justiciero...
This is a debate high on emotion and low on facts. Trump's campaign promises were vague, and Javi is skeptical about the impact there will be this time round.
Son solamente 4 años de administración. Somos muchos millones en este país. No, tendrían que contratar a mucho personal, mucha gente para que eso se diera. Lo dudo mucho.
Whatever his policies look like in reality, Trump's hardline stance on immigration has won the support of many Americans. Although illegal crossings at the southern border dropped sharply at the end of last year, the issue helped propel him to the White House. Now some undocumented people feel they are the collateral damage from increasingly right-wing rhetoric.
No podemos decir que estamos tranquilos, o sea, no. Es un miedo que nos ha sembrado no solamente a mí o a mi familia, a muchos latinos que estamos aquí, nos ha sembrado ese miedo de que no se sabe qué va a pasar.
Maria came here 3 years ago after fleeing violence in Colombia. Age 24, she's already set up a cleaning business, providing jobs for other migrants while sending money to her parents back home.
Entonces queremos hacer un cambio, de cierta manera un cambio, digamos, de estas nuevas generaciones, hacer un cambio tanto aquí en este país, tanto en el país de nosotros. Vinimos a hacer las cosas bien, o sea, no vinimos, como vuelvo y te digo, a ocasionarle un mal a este país.
At a moment of political division, Bakersfield Hispanic community is pulling together. Raúl and his family are attending a parade for the Virgin of Guadalupe, the patron saint of Mexico. It's a tradition which connects people from across Latin America, at a time when many feel they are being singled out.
El 90% está sentida, pero más que nada que cómo se siente, tienen miedo, tienen temor que separen a las familias, que el esposo vaya a trabajar y ya no regrese. Y este miedo está hasta el 20 de enero, cada vez que se acerca enero, el 20 de la toma de posesión, hay más miedo, pero tenemos que estar unidos.
Ronald Reagan once said America's strength comes from its immigrant heritage and capacity to welcome foreigners. It's now up to the incoming Republican president to decide how far that welcome is extended.
Guillermo Galdos with that special report. Now, the former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan has been sentenced to 14 years in jail after he and his wife were accused of receiving plots of land as a bribe. Mr. Khan has spent the last 18 months in prison, facing more than 100 legal cases, all of which he says are politically motivated. The former cricketer was ousted in 2022 after falling out with the country's powerful military, but he remains Pakistan's most popular political figure. Here's Harry Fawcett.
Imran Khan's wife, Bushra Bibi, driven for sentencing to the same jail in Rawalpindi, where he has been imprisoned for nearly a year and a half. It was a one-way journey. Bibi sentenced to 7 years, Khan to 14 on charges of corruption in a land deal. Close family and party leaders outside to protest the decision.
This is a fake case. It's a politically motivated case. Everybody in Pakistan knows it.
Khan Sahib has done no wrong. He has committed no crime. He is simply there in the jail just to put a pressure on him, and it's a political victimization.
Khan has been in custody since August 2023, facing more than 100 charges, convicted on several, including selling state gifts, leaking government documents, and entering a fraudulent marriage with his wife. Those cases were either overturned or had their sentences suspended. But Khan remains jailed on charges of incitement relating to violent protests that followed his first arrest in May of 2023. This latest conviction involves £190 million seized from a property tycoon, which prosecutors said Khan funneled back to pay the tycoon's fines. In return, Khan said to have received valuable plots of land that his party said were for a welfare institute. But the sentencing comes even as Khan was in talks with the government and the powerful military. So is it in part a negotiating ploy?
I think the military clearly wants to send a very clear message to Khan and his party and supporters that either you play by our rules or expect more of the same.
Khan's leverage comes largely from continuing anti-government protests and the fact that despite having to stand as independents, his PTI party candidates won the most seats in last year's parliamentary election. His supporters hope a still more significant factor will be in play from next Monday.
I don't want to kill 10 million people.
Banking on the incoming Trump administration to pressure Pakistan's military establishment. This after a Trump confidant, Richard Grenell, made a number of viral posts on X demanding Khan's release. Donald Trump may well have other priorities than the fate even of a man he described as a friend during his first term. Imran Khan's supporters, though, cast him as a fellow victim of a political witch hunt and hope the new US president will act accordingly.
3 lawyers for the late Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny have been jailed for between 3.5 and 5.5 years for belonging to an extremist group. Supporters applauded Igor Sergunin, Alexei Liptser and Vadim Kobzev, who were arrested in October of 2023, months before Mr. Navalny died in an Arctic penal colony. They were accused of enabling him to keep operating as the leader of an extremist group by relaying his messages to the outside world. At least 4 people have been killed in a Russian missile attack on the Ukrainian city of Kryvyi Rih. 3 women and a man died in the attack, which badly damaged an educational institution and 2 5-story residential buildings, one of which caught fire. 7 people were injured, 4 of them are in a serious condition. Now, 170 million TikTok users in the United States may have to suddenly find a new platform for their videos after the Supreme Court unanimously upheld a law effectively banning the app. The Attorney General said the ruling would prevent the Chinese government from weaponizing TikTok to undermine America's national security. The ban is due to take effect from Sunday. But Donald Trump says he needs time to decide whether to enforce it. Here's Kieran Woodley.
TikTok. For its users, it's their go-to for everything.
Chocolate chip cookie with a shot of milk was so bomb.
But for some politicians in Washington, it's a Chinese-owned app that poses a national security risk. And while there are more Americans on TikTok than voted in last year's elections, it's the politicians who have the power to turn the lights off on TikTok.
And to the US government, I'm never forgiving you for this.
The Supreme Court today upheld a decision that, unless the app finds an approved new owner by Sunday, then it will effectively be banned in the United States.
The American people need the truth.
It was last year when Congress grilled TikTok's CEO, concerned that the app, owned by Chinese company ByteDance, was linked to the government in Beijing, and that it could harvest potentially the personal information of millions of Americans. TikTok denied this, but the anti-Beijing paranoia of senators was clearly on display.
Of what nation are you a citizen?
Singapore.
Are you a citizen of any other nation?
No, Senator.
Have you ever applied for Chinese citizenship?
Senator, I served my nation in Singapore. No, I did not.
The anti-TikTok brigade was a rare thing in Washington, bipartisan. Democrats and Republicans approved the bill, and it was signed by President Biden in April. ByteDance now had 9 months to either sell TikTok to a US-approved buyer or be shut down. Yet as that deadline approached this Sunday, some politicians were getting cold feet.
We're getting real momentum on stopping the ban on TikTok on
It seemed they now feared the backlash from TikTok's 170 million users in the United States.
I'm not ready!
People shocked that the government would ban a social media app, a seeming violation of the First Amendment.
My life changed thanks to TikTok.
And stop a site that contributes billions of dollars to the US economy. threatening the livelihood of influencers.
Will also go away.
Content creation, it is a full-time job. It is a real job. You're delivering a service and you're getting paid.
So what will the president-elect do? Because it was in Trump's first term that a TikTok ban was originally discussed by the US government. It all fit in with a shift in America's stance towards China, from tentative friends to trade wars. But Trump's re-election was in part down to his appeal to young male voters, and he found huge success on TikTok, meaning there was a pivot in his stance.
We did go on TikTok, and we had a great response. We had billions of views, billions and billions of views.
Today, Trump announced he'd spoken with Chinese President Xi Jinping, saying that together they could immediately solve many problems, including TikTok. Trump could sign an executive order when he comes into office and delay the ban for a few more weeks. And TikTok CEO today posted this clip.
I want to thank President Trump for his commitment to work with us to find a solution that keeps TikTok available in the United States.
All this shows the predicament of Trump's incoming coalition of Republicans. On the one hand, this is an aggressive America First movement that wants to protect the US from a rising China. On the other hand, this is the anti-woke group that wants to ensure freedom of speech. So this TikTok tale is a sign of things to come, a short-form video platform that offers a long-term window into the years ahead.
After the break, some Friday inspiration. Finally, a new film tells the story of American boxer Clarissa Shields. Born in poverty, she went on to win 2 Olympic gold medals and to fight for equal pay. It's an inspirational sports movie about a young athlete with a rough background beating the odds. So far, so predictable. But The Fire Inside is not your typical biopic. It tells the incredible story of American boxer Clarissa Shields, who grew up in extreme poverty and went on to win 2 Olympic gold medals. The first one aged just 17. But it's her fight for equal pay outside the ring that makes her story punch above its weight. Our sports reporter, Jordan Jarrett Bryan, spoke to her, the actor who portrays her in the film, as well as the movie's director.
Girl named Clarissa came into the gym tonight. What you think about girls boxing?
Don't see no reason why she can't. She got hands.
The Fire Inside tells the true story of world champion boxer Clarissa Shields.
USA Boxing hasn't won a gold medal since 2004.
Yeah, well, none of them boxers was Clarissa, was it?
The first boxer, male or female, to win 2 Olympic gold medals back-to-back, overcame a childhood of poverty and doubts about whether women should even be in the ring in the first place. But this isn't your usual rags-to-riches story. Unlike other films, this biopic doesn't end when Shields wins her first gold. I sat down with the star who plays Clarissa, as well as the director, and started by asking why she decided to focus on the hardship that followed her Olympic triumph.
I think that's not life. Like, you don't get to end with the win, but especially if you're a black woman from Flint, Michigan, you don't get to end with the win. You don't get the things that you are promised. And I think this idea of the American dream versus the American reality, it's one thing to get knocked down, it's another thing to keep getting back up.
There were a lot of things that I think connected to as young black women and wanting to achieve these big dreams and goals and kind of having to push past a lot of the stereotypes and the ceilings that are placed on us.
What were those stereotypes that were placed upon black women and black girls?
Clearly within the story you see how you are judged based off of not only how you look, but how you talk, how you dress. You know, a lot of things are just, I guess, prejudged before you even get to know a person.
We would love you to stop saying that you like hitting people and making them cry.
Why?
He just seemed like a bully.
I box. I am a bully. Floyd a bully, Ward a bully. Hell, even Ali was a bully.
Yeah, we understand that.
So I can't be a bully because I'm a girl.
Having that sense of confidence like hers is also looked down upon, especially when you are a woman. And when a man does it, it's completely okay, but when a woman does it, she's looked at in a different light.
And is that hypocrisy and inequality in sport. Do you recognise that in your industry as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of what I could relate to in the film is like as a female cinematographer, I think we peaked at maybe 6% in studio movies, 6 or 7%. We're back down apparently to like 4%, but it's, you know, it's exhausting being the exception to the rule because then it becomes all anybody wants to focus on and not just the work itself.
We're seeing back in Los Angeles, it's most large parts are literally on fire. Mm-hmm. How difficult is it for you guys to be here knowing what's happening back there? And also, what are your thoughts on the President-elect's comments about, you know, the fire services and the disparaging comments that he's making about the job that they're doing?
The devastation is going to be felt, you know, the ripple effect, all of it is going to be felt for years and maybe forever. The president-elect of it all is, I mean, it's an embarrassment. I don't know. We should all, like, at the very least, we should be supporting each other and lifting each other up in the face of tragedy. So to do anything other than that it's disgusting, to be honest.
Clarissa Shields is currently in Atlanta training for her next fight. I caught up with her and asked her what it was like seeing her life portrayed on the big screen.
It was very surreal, to be honest with you. I think I've had majority of my life be somewhat documented, but to see someone else, you know, act as me and portray me, and it was very unique to see. And I was just honored that I'm one of the boxers who actually have a biopic about their life because it's not a whole lot of us.
And we see in the film how difficult and how hard your upbringing was. How much did your upbringing and the difficulties of that align with your fighting instincts to want to be a boxer and a fighter?
I guess me being like, you know, literally like hungry all the time for food, I guess it made me just be hungry as a fighter, you know? It showed me that sometimes you're gonna go without a meal or you're gonna go without having something that you need, but you still have to do what you have to do. I just knew growing up as a kid that nobody was gonna do anything for me, so I had to do everything myself.
Both of them putting everything.
When she's not fighting women in the ring, she's fighting for equal pay outside it. Shields turned down offers aged just 17 to ensure she and other women got what they deserved.
At a very young age, I just basically let them know, like, hey, I won't even go back to the Olympics, you know, unless you guys, you know, be fair. You know, pay us what you pay the men, and not just me, but all of us.
The fire inside shows a life with plenty of hardship, setbacks, successes, and even more setbacks. For Clarissa Shields, who's a current champion and aged just 29, it's also a story that's far from its conclusion.
And while we've been on air, the family of the former Manchester United and Scotland footballer Denis Law has announced that he's died at the age of 84. Law won 2 league titles with United and was part of the European Cup winning side in 1968. His 30 goals for Scotland was matched only by Kenny Dalglish, and he was made a CBE in 2016 for services to football and charity. That's all we have time for. Thanks for watching. We're back at 5:30 tomorrow evening, but we'll leave you with some of the acclaimed work of acting legend Dame Joan Plowright, who also died today, aged 95.
Why don't you leave your old man alone? That's right. Why don't you leave your old man alone?
I'd like to tell you the truth about your father. He doesn't give a damn about anyone. He's 2 penneth of nothing.
I'd say that sums me up.
Dear Alfred Tennyson, who pulled my pigtails and said they were too long, and I sat on Mr. Carlyle's knee.
Oh, swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon that monthly changes in her circled orbit, lest that of thy love prove likewise variable.
Today's outlook may take a turn. Channel 4 weather, sponsored by DeLonghi Bean to Cup coffee machines.
Good evening. The weekend weather forecast coming up in just a moment, but before then it's time for Climate Watch, and today the Met Office announced that last year saw the biggest annual increase in carbon dioxide levels on record in Earth's atmosphere. And of course, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and rising levels of it are driving climate change, which in turn is worsening extreme weather around the world. And it's only going to improve if those levels start to come down significantly. Now, as for the weather this weekend, it's looking pretty quiet across the UK, often dry, but it will be chilly for most of us with temperatures typically a couple of degrees below average for this time of year. Tonight then, there'll be cloudy skies for much of the UK, some mist and murk, maybe a little bit of drizzle, even some light snow, some snow grains across East Anglia and South East England perhaps, but there will be some clearer spells for North Wales, North East England and particularly for the far north of Scotland. Windy towards the far northwest and mild in the north, 6 or 7 Celsius there, but elsewhere close to and locally below freezing, maybe a touch of frost for some. So tomorrow, it's a fairly cloudy and murky start to the day for most of us, but for England and Wales, skies will brighten towards the north and west with a little bit of sunshine. Elsewhere, it stays pretty cloudy for much of the day. A lot of cloud for Northern Ireland and southern parts of Scotland, but for northern Scotland, bright skies and sunshine for a good part of the day. Still mild in the north, around 9, 10, maybe 11 Celsius, but look at that. Chilly further southward, some places getting no higher than around 5 or 6 degrees. It's a couple of degrees below average for this time of year. Now, by the time you get to Sunday, it's another chilly start to the day, a few patches of fog, maybe some frost first thing. There will be sunshine, though, for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and the western side of England, before a little bit of rain starts to trickle in off the Atlantic by the end of the day. But for central and eastern parts of England, it's cloudy and grey for much of the day and temperatures widely below average for this time of year. Enjoy your evening. Goodbye.
It's starting to pour. DeLonghi Bean to Cup coffee machines sponsor Weather on 4.